Welcome to Expert Views on ADR Ever Video podcast show, a podcast about simplifying the traditional African method of settling disputes or the appropriate dispute resolution ADR in a bid to attract more users to settle via disputes, mediation, arbitration, collaborative law, negotiation, conciliation, early dispute resolution, restorative justice, and of course, adjudication and early neutral evaluation. This week, I'm sitting with Professor Ken Cloke. Prof is a world-recognized mediator, dialogue facilitator, conflict resolution systems designer, teacher, public speaker, author of numerous books, articles, a pioneer and leader in the field of mediation and conflict resolution for the last 37 years. In 1983, Prof Ken created the Center for Dispute Resolution in Santa Monica, California, where he has been a mediator, arbitrator, facilitator, coach, consultant, and trainer, specializing in communication, collaborative negotiation, dialogue facilitation, and resolving complex multi-party disputes. It's such an honor to have you, Prof.
Well, thank you very, very much, Chinwe. My pleasure.
Okay, so without further ado, the first question is, in ADR practice, success is often measured by settlement. What, in your experience, happens after a workplace dispute is resolved? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, let me just say that this is actually now my 46th year in dispute resolution. So I have a lot of successes to reflect on and also non-successes. What we could define as failures, but I'd like to redefine that for a moment. The question is, what is success and what is failure? Winston Churchill famously defined success as, in quotes, proceeding from failure to failure with undiminished enthusiasm. And that's what we do in mediation, because every conflict can be defined as a place where people are stuck.
Yeah.
And we see their being stuck as a failure, and we see their becoming unstuck as a success. So the difficulty is that mediation is a consensus-based form of conflict resolution, which means it isn't our choice. We're not the judges. We don't get to decide what happens to other people. So if we measure our success by how many agreements we reach, we have made our success dependent on other people doing what we want them to do, rather than on doing what they want to do. So another way of looking at this is to say that we can define success as the willingness to fail, and failure as being overly preoccupied with success. That is, on reaching a specific agreement. Sometimes what success consists of in mediation is a sudden realization of what is actually happening in the conflict that draws people into a deeper level of awareness, some flash of insight and understanding, some deep connection between people that didn't exist before. And that may or may not take the form of an agreement. So the problem in the workplace is, with workplace disputes, is that what usually happens is that management tells people to just behave. Just be polite to one another. And that, of course, is one approach to ending disputes. But the difficulty is what exactly caused the dispute in the first place. And having mediated thousands of disputes, I will tell you this. Every workplace conflict, indeed I would say every conflict in general, takes place because of something that has failed within the relationship, within the processes, within the structures and systems that are operating in the workplace. So here's a different definition of conflict for the workplace. Conflict is the sound made by the cracks in a system. And if that's the case, sometimes what happens is two people get into conflicts with each other and they blame each other for those conflicts. But the truth is they had nothing to do with how the conflict happened. You may have, for example, a supervisor and an employee, but maybe the supervisor is under a lot of pressure to produce results and the employee hasn't been properly trained in being able to produce those results. You're going to get a conflict, but the truth is you've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 systems that are actually not working. And the conflict is just a way of saying, wait a minute, stop. Let's take a look at why this isn't working and see if we can't fix that instead.
Oh, thank you so very much. Such an insightful definition of what success means in ADR practice, and also what happens after a workplace dispute must have is resolved and has arisen. You said something that really touched me, that sometimes during workplace conflict, the employee might not be able to know what the job entails, and that would sort of introduce conflict, or would sort of nudge or make the employer and the employees to sort of have a conflicting opinion, or conflict would arise. And in that instance, Prof, what would be your advice? How would HR step in that instance? Thank you.
Yes. Well, here we have a number of different systems that are operating. So, for example, there is the system where that defines how people are hired. So, for example, I was brought into a law firm where there was a conflict between the legal secretaries. And what happened is the system for hiring legal secretaries was that each lawyer would hire the legal secretary who supported them. And the legal secretaries then had different amounts of work based on the amount of work that was being done by the lawyers. But if one legal secretary was being overworked, the other legal secretaries felt there was no reason to step in and help her. So instead, what we said is, I just asked a very simple question. Who knows more about whether someone would make a good legal secretary, a lawyer or another legal secretary? And it's clear that another legal secretary would know in about 5 seconds whether this legal secretary could do the job or not. Whereas a lawyer doesn't understand the process of being a legal secretary. The lawyer is the customer. And the customer perhaps should have a say, a voice in how this should happen. So we had to restructure the entire system whereby legal secretaries were hired. Here's a second example. An example that in which this had to do with a corporation that was putting satellites up into orbit, communication satellites. And there were 2 teams that had to get the satellites ready. for the launch. One was a day team and the other was a night team. Two men were the heads of those teams, and those two men hated each other. So every night they did work to prepare for the launch, but the two men who were supposed to speak to each other and tell each other what happened on the night shift so the day shift could prepare weren't talking to each other. And their supporters weren't talking to each other because they got the message from their bosses. 3 satellites failed at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the corporation brought me in to say, fix this. And so what we found out was, first of all, they only had 15 minutes overlap between the day shift and the night shift. You can't tell somebody in 15 minutes what happened on your shift. There were no records for people, or inadequate records to hand over to people. And so we created now a 1-hour period of overlap. And we created something called meetings without chairs. Because as soon as people got into chairs, they got their coffee, they got their donut, they got, they would sit back, they'd relax, they'd talk a little bit about, football or whatever, but they weren't having the real discussion. So we created an agenda, and this is called Meetings Without Chairs, and it just had a flip chart. And somebody had to stand there and say, okay, here's the agenda on the flip chart. 1, what happened on the night shift that we need to know about in the day shift, and vice versa. Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Okay, done. Now we're ready to go. Then that's a second type of conflict where it wasn't that the employees didn't have the skills, they didn't have the time frame in which to debrief each other about what was happening. Here's another example. 2 women who are fighting with each other all the time. Every single conversation they have is a yelling and screaming match between the 2 of them. So I come in to mediate because one is the supervisor and the other is the employee. The supervisor is about to fire the employee. They decide they'll try mediation. So I come in to mediate, and this is in the big corporate offices, and the room that we were supposed to meet in was locked and nobody had the key. So we had to send away for the janitor to get the keys to unlock the door. So we're sitting out in the open. We can't really talk about the issues. So I just say, just tell me a little something about yourself while we're waiting. In about 2 minutes, it turns out they both came from families of more than 10 children. Guess which birth order the supervisor was? Number 1. Guess which birth order the employee was? The baby, the youngest, right? So now they couldn't believe this. It was so amazing. And they knew each other backwards and forwards. So the younger one would say, "You're not my mom, don't be my boss." And the other one say, "Stop being so irresponsible. Don't be such a baby." And they would laugh because they knew exactly where it came from. And so they had now an understanding, a deep understanding of why they had all these fights and all the conflict. In the space of about 20 seconds, every bit of conflict disappeared.
Thank
just
you,
because
Prof.
of that. Yeah.
Oh wow, you're a genius. I've said it out. You've said it countless times. Oh my goodness, this. I'm so happy. I'm so happy because Prof, this is real life situation, especially workplace conflict. That's it. Most people have faced workplace conflict, and we need people like you to sort of educate us, educate HR, educate organizational leaders, universities, institutions on how to settle workplace conflict. And I mean, this right here is, oh my goodness, so profound, insightful. a masterclass. And I mean, I'm so happy. And because I know that so many people are looking for ways to settle workplace conflict, and apart from workplace conflict, conflict in general, but workplace conflict is so it's so common. And of course, a lot of people have suffered anxiety and depression because of workplace conflict. So thank you so
Yes.
very much for that
Oh, you're
clarification
very
and
welcome.
insightful discussion on that. So what how do you distinguish between settlement, resolution, reconciliation, and transformation?
Ah, very nice. Very nice question. There are actually many different approaches to conflict. The first one is actually conflict suppression. That is trying to get rid of it, make it go away, punish the people who are engaged in conflict. If we think about two children in a family, what happens in many families? If the children get into a conflict with each other, they both get punished.
Yeah.
So that's one approach. And that everything that happens in the family carries over into the workplace, because people go from the family to the workplace and then from the workplace back into the family. And so you can see that a lot of the what happens in the family can be helpful in thinking about what happens in the workplace. So that's the first piece. The second piece is to simply stop the fighting. That is a ceasefire. And a ceasefire is a step forward. So if you were in Gaza right now, or in Ukraine, or in Sudan, a ceasefire would sound like a good thing. So now that's a sort of a second level. And there's a little bit in between there. Between suppression and the ceasefire, there is denial, pretending the conflict doesn't exist, ignoring it, hoping it will go away. And that doesn't work either. So now we've come through those stages. We get to stopping the fighting. What happens after that? After that, we get de-escalation. And to some extent, we can call this conciliation. We conciliate between people. We try to, make them be more civil in their conversations with one another. We model how to do that. But none of that reaches the level of an agreement. So the first step where we get to an agreement is settlement. And we settle the issues in a case. Stopping the fighting is mostly physical. We can do that by physically separating people. And if you do that in the workplace, you put one person over in one unit and another person in another unit, and that sort of stops their fighting, but they still are angry at each other. They still feel upset every time they see each other. And so that if they have to work together at all, like these two men putting up the satellites, they have to figure out how to communicate what is important for each other to know. So that's settlement. And so if the first one is physical, the second one is mental. Settlement is about analyzing the issues, trying to figure out what happened. And here what we try to do is we identify the issue as an it rather than as a you. If someone is engaged in behaviors, instead of blaming the person and focusing on them, the problem as a you, we try to shift their thinking to focus on the problem as an it. But then let's assume that we settle all the issues. That sounds perfectly good. Let's say, for example, again, we're back in the family. We've got two kids who are fighting over a piece of cake. Who gets which slice of cake? And we can settle that one, but a week later there's going to be a piece of pie, and they're going to be fighting over the pie. And so what we have to do is we have to get to a state where we move beyond settlement to resolving the underlying reasons that gave rise to the dispute, usually emotional reasons, and will continue to create problems and conflicts until it's resolved. So stopping the fighting is physical, settling the issues is mental, but resolving the underlying issues is emotional. And what we have to then do is figure out, why are they so angry at each other? What's really going on? What's beneath the anger? And here's what's always beneath the anger. If we ask the question, what is anger? We will sooner or later come to the idea that nobody gets angry over things they don't care about. So all anger is about caring. And now instead of asking someone, what are you angry about? We can ask them, why do you care so much about this? And we're going to get a very, very different kind of response, one that will help them reach a resolution of the underlying reasons. What's better than resolution? The answer is, even if you've resolved the underlying emotional issues between these two kids, there's still the memory of how the other person treated you. And we have to do something with that memory. So if we've got physical, mental, and emotional, what's left? And the answer is spiritual. But by spiritual, what we mean is energetic. The quality of life energy, the amount of our life energy that we have stuck in conflict so that we can't move forward in our lives because we're constantly thinking about this conflict, this person who did this to us, how it felt to us. We're going back and back and back into it. So what do we call this? We call this forgiveness. And there's a final level, internal level, which is if you now have a family or a couple, married couple or whatever, and they have forgiven each other, is it totally over? And the answer is not exactly, because you can forgive someone and your heart is still not open to them. So there's a final piece, which is the piece in which you open your heart again to the other person. And that I call reconciliation. And then there's one last piece. What's better than reconciliation? The answer is prevention. And that is figuring out how to prevent future conflicts like this from happening again. Now, here's the important part. Every one of these is a transformation, meaning a change in the form of the conflict. We have transformed the conflict by changing the way that we interact with it, by stopping people from fighting and separating them, by conciliating between them, by helping to reach an agreement between them, by trying to find out why they got into this conflict in the first place and resolving the underlying reasons, by getting to forgiveness and by reconciliation. All of those are transformations of the conflict. But here's what they also are. Everyone is also a transcendence of an earlier state of being stuck at a lower level of conflict because you could only use lower level dispute resolution techniques. So in wars, we have the heads of nation states or the heads of armed groups like Boko Haram in Nigeria. And like the Israeli Defense Force and Hamas, or like the Revolutionary Guards in Iran and the US military, whatever it may happen to be. And they only know one language, which is to hurt each other. And they're going to get stuck because they don't know how to get to a less brutal, sort of inhumane way of resolving their conflicts. But those ways exist. And that's what mediation is. It's a way of helping people figure out how to evolve to a higher order of conflict by using higher order resolution skills. So here's one that we all know, and you know as well as I do because of being a mediator: listening. Active, responsive, empathetic listening does an enormous amount. That's a skill. And if you are the head of a nation state, you actually don't have very high level listening skills. They're very poor. Any 3-year-old could beat you in a contest over listening skills. They've forgotten how to listen to each other. And they've forgotten for a reason, because it actually helps them mobilize their populations to demonize the other side and say they're not worth listening to. And now we have permission to shoot them. So I think it's exactly the same, whether it's between two kids on a playground or the heads of nation states, whether it's a workplace conflict or a family conflict, or a conflict between ethnic communities, between tribal communities, between social classes, between religions, between political perspectives or beliefs. What we require is basically very simple. We need to stop and ask, try to listen to the other side and find out why we are in this conflict. And the truth of why we are in it isn't just our truth. It is our truth and their truth combined in a creative way that allows us to figure out what is really going on here. If we just adopt one truth, it means we've adopted what in conflict resolution we call a zero-sum approach to solving problems. So if there's a total of 10, if I get 7, you get 3. That's a zero sum. So there's only one sum, which is 10. But if I get 8, you only get 2. And that's put us into competition with one another over resources, when the truth is we could resolve this issue by sharing, by cooperating, by figuring out how to work together, by realizing that we are all on this tiny little planet trying to survive, etc., etc. So the difficulty is that we are now facing problems that are global in nature, that are complex, really, really difficult to resolve, problems that have more than one possible solution, problems in which one idea about how to solve the problem isn't enough. We need multiple ideas, multiple approaches. How do we do that? There's only one way: figuring out how to talk to each other. So that's what I would say is important in connection with seeing this as stages. We can think of it just this way. I like to describe it this way. Every conflict, I wrote a book with this title. The title of the book is The Crossroads of Conflict. So what is the crossroads? And the answer, I think, is that every conflict takes place at a crossroads that is defined on the one hand by a problem we are now required to solve. Because if we aren't required to solve it, we can forget about it. But if we're now required to solve it, we have to face it. And on the other hand, by the fact that we do not yet have the skills we need in order to solve it. So you're a teenager and your family and your parents want to prevent you from going out with your friends. This is a problem in virtually every family. At what age does a teenager have the right to make choices for themselves about what time they're going to come home? Every culture, every society has a different way of solving this problem. But what we need to see is every culture is solving it according to its own truths. And it's possible for each culture to learn from the other cultures about what their truths are, and thereby get to higher order solutions more quickly, more easily, with less bloodshed and yelling and screaming.
Thank you so very much for that.
You're welcome.
I have questions, but we might be running out of time, just 7 minutes. But I want to highlight the fact that that listening is an essential tool in creating conflict, because when there is conflict, we don't listen to one another. When you don't listen, you can't hear each other out. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And also, you touched about the conflict in Nigeria, and how about the conflict in Israel? Because you've done so much work in peacemaking in different jurisdictions, especially war zone areas. Can you sort of tell us what lessons you've learned, and also what has surprised you the most about human behavior? Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice questions. Well, first, let me say that I have worked in a number of conflict areas, conflict zones, including in Nigeria between the Sandinista government and the Contras. I've worked in Cuba with people who are in favor and those who are against the regime. I've worked in Zimbabwe, trying to mediate with the supporters of Morgan Tsvangirai and the supporters of Robert Mugabe. In Ireland, helping to think together with Irish mediators about how to bring Catholics and Protestants into conversation with one another, etc. Many, many different examples, including between Ukrainians and Russians, and between Palestinians and Israelis. And right now I am working, as we were describing a little before we started, working with two groups. One is a group of Muslim mediators in Israel who are Israelis, they're Palestinians, and they're Muslim, and they are developing their conflict resolution skills within the Muslim community in Israel. And the second is a group of Jewish mediators who independently have been developing their skills, and the difficulty is they have never really gotten together. So for the very first time, we have brought them together to talk with each other and to develop skills together. We brought a series, there are a couple of different things that are different. I've also been working with a group called Combatants for Peace in Israel, which is, and the Palestinian territories, which is composed of members of the Israeli Defense Force, Hamas, Fatah, and Islamic Jihad. People who are former fighters who've said, this doesn't work. And so we are now combatants for peace. And now, what do we need to do in order for that to work? Well, the first thing that has to happen is we have to learn about nonviolent communication. And so the members of Combatants for Peace have been trained in nonviolent communication techniques. And then a second piece is dialogue techniques. And I've been doing a lot of training in how to conduct dialogues between people who hate each other, people who are completely 100% opposed to each other. And the question is how you would do that. So here are a couple of examples. Here's an opening question for almost any kind of political dialogue between political opponents. The question is, what life experiences have you had that have led you to feel so passionately about this issue? And the answer isn't a political speech, it's a history, it's a life story. And now we've got something that we can begin to feel empathy for, that the other person on the other side can feel empathy for. So when I was working in Zimbabwe, for example, that was one of the things that we would do. We would have empathy-building conversations, or between Ukrainians and Russians when I did those sessions. Here's another example. I designed and conducted dialogues with an international team from Mediators Beyond Borders, a group that I started 20 years ago, in Athens, between immigrants and Greek citizens. Immigrants who came to Greece fleeing civil wars in their countries, and Greek citizens who were opposed to immigration because there were problems that were occurring and nobody was addressing them. So here were the two opening questions for those dialogues. There were many, many questions we designed, but here are the two opening ones that seemed to work. To each person, asking each person to answer for themselves. Have you personally, in your life, in a family or a neighborhood or a school or a workplace, ever been the new one? And everybody else has been there for a long time. And you're just brand new. How did it feel? How were you treated? How would you have liked to have been treated? What happened? And then secondly, have you ever been in your family or neighborhood or school or workplace, the one who's been there for a while and now new people are coming in and changing the rules? How does that feel? What happened? How were you treated? Etc. And now everybody can start to understand what it might feel like to be the new one and to be the one who has been there and put down roots, and now everything is changing. And then we can start to have a conversation about the problems that we have together, that we have to solve together. And seeing the problems in that way is really helpful. So I would say, and then there are, in Ireland, what happened was that there were many people who were working on dialogue techniques for Catholics and Protestants in the Republic of Ireland, in Northern Ireland, and many efforts were taking place. But what happened was a group of women, mothers, said, we're not doing this anymore. We're not sending our children to school to get beat up because of the religion of their parents. This makes no sense. We're stopping doing that. And they were able to, it was very powerful.
Thank you so much, Ronnie.
Yeah.
We have minutes, to round off. Yeah, thank you.